The water coming out of your kitchen tap right now contains things you cannot see: iron, manganese, sulfur compounds, trace heavy metals leaching out of pipe and bedrock. According to the United States Geological Survey, 1 out of every 4 private wells in this country exceeds at least one federal health-based drinking water standard. 1 in 4. And the residential water treatment industry that sells you bottled water, filter cartridges, and $3,000 whole house systems is now worth $15 billion a year. Every dollar of it is built on the assumption that you do not know what your grandfather knew. $3 a year. That is what a 79-year-old retired coal miner named Vernon Caldwell spends to filter every drop of water that comes out of his well in Wise County, Virginia. No electric pump, no replacement cartridge, no service contract. I am standing in his kitchen right now. 3 feet from me, on a wooden shelf above the sink, sits a clay jug, a wooden barrel cut in half, and a glass jar full of black gravel. That is the system his grandfather built in 1948. The water it produces tests cleaner than anything you can buy at a grocery store. The United States Department of Agriculture documented the design in 1934 and then pulled the bulletin out of public circulation in 1971. The agency replaced it with a pamphlet that named 3 commercial brands. They have spent 50 years making sure you never go back. After the last video, hundreds of you wrote in asking about water. You said, "Earl, the cooling trick on the cabin is fine, but what about what's coming out of my tap? What about the iron stains in the bathtub? What about the smell when the pump runs after a hard rain?" So I drove 4.5 hours into Wise County, Virginia, up a gravel road that ends at Vernon's front gate. And what I found in his kitchen is the same 3-stage filtration system that kept the Cherokee, the Scots-Irish, and every settler in these mountains alive for 200 years before anybody had ever heard of a municipal water plant. This works on a private well. It works on a spring. It works as a final stage polish on city water if you don't trust what's coming out of the tap, and it costs less than what you spent on lunch yesterday. Before this video is over, 3 things are going to land on you. First, I'm going to walk you through the exact 3-stage filter Vernon's grandfather built in 1948. 3 materials, all of them at a hardware store today for under $3. I'll show you the order, the ratios, and the part most folks get wrong. Second, I'm going to tell you about a 1934 USDA Farmer's Bulletin I dug out of a county extension archive in Big Stone Gap. That bulletin documented this filter design across 200 Appalachian homesteads. It included photographs of the construction. It listed the materials and the water quality test results from before and after. And in 1971, it was pulled from circulation and replaced with a pamphlet that told farmers to install commercial whole house filtration systems that ran between $400 and $1,200. I'll name the year. I'll name the agency. I'll name the company that benefited. Third, I'm going to tell you about something I found buried in a footnote of a 1956 Penn State Extension bulletin on rural water quality. A modification to this filter that handles a specific kind of contaminant most folks don't even know is in their water. Stay with me. None of this is hard. All of it works. Here's the number you ought to sit with for a second. The average American household spends between $300 and $700 a year on bottled water, water filters, replacement cartridges, and water quality test kits. Over a 30-year stretch, that's between $9,000 and $21,000. Just to drink water that comes out of the ground free. I'll tell you something. For 35 years, I lived in that brick ranch in Akron. I bought bottled water by the case at the grocery store. I installed a filter on my kitchen tap and changed the cartridge every 6 months at $38 a cartridge. I had a whole house filtration system put in by a plumber in 2007 for $2,600. I serviced it once a year for another $140. I drank water my whole adult life that I paid for, one way or another, every single month without ever asking why. My granddaddy Wendell raised 3 boys outside Hazard on water that came out of a spring on his back 40. He never paid for water in his life. He filtered it through a system his own father had taught him to build in 1928. Wendell drank that water from the time he was 8 years old until the day he died at 83. He never had a kidney stone. He never had a stomach problem. He never bought a single bottle of water at a store. I thought he was just lucky. That's what I told myself for 30 years. He wasn't lucky. He knew something I didn't. And what he knew had been written down in plain English by the United States Department of Agriculture in 1934, and then quietly taken back out of the rule book 40 years later. Let me tell you what's actually in your well water, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. The Environmental Protection Agency tracks roughly 90 contaminants in drinking water. Of those, the most common in private well water across the eastern United States are iron, manganese, arsenic, lead from old pipes, sulfur compounds, agricultural runoff including nitrates, and biological contaminants like coliform bacteria. In Appalachian states specifically, the most common issue is iron and manganese leaching from limestone bedrock, followed by sulfur-reducing bacteria, and, in coal country counties, residual heavy metals from old mining operations that contaminated the aquifer decades ago. Most private wells in this country are never tested. The EPA doesn't require it. State agencies recommend it, but cannot enforce it. According to a 2009 USGS national survey, approximately 23% of private wells sampled exceeded a federal health-based drinking water standard for at least one contaminant. 23%. Roughly 1 well in 4 had something in it that, by the EPA's own published standards, should not be there. Iron and manganese, on their own, are not classified as dangerous at low levels. The EPA categorizes them as secondary contaminants, meaning they affect taste, color, and laundry, but not typically health. The trouble starts when iron and manganese deposits build up inside your pipes over decades, creating a habitat for bacteria. The trouble also starts when manganese levels run high enough to affect neurological function, which has been documented in long-term studies from Quebec and Bangladesh, both of which I'll reference in the description below this video. Volatile organic compounds, agricultural runoff, and pesticide residues are a separate category, common in farm country wells, and not addressed by the simple filter I'm about to describe. If you've got those, you need a different solution. Vernon's filter handles the most common Appalachian well water issues: sediment, iron, manganese, sulfur compounds, taste, smell, color, and basic bacterial load. It does not handle nitrates, arsenic, or industrial chemicals. I want to be straight with you about what it does and doesn't do. So how does it work? It works by combining 3 of the oldest filtration materials known to human beings, in a specific order, with each material handling a specific job. The first stage is coarse sand, 2 inches of clean, washed builder's sand at the top of the filter. It catches sediment, rust particles, leaves, dirt, and anything large enough to see. This is the cheapest layer. A 50-pound bag of builder's sand costs about $4 at any hardware store and contains enough material for 2 years of filter refills. The second stage is the part most folks get wrong: hardwood charcoal, not briquettes, not lump charcoal from the grill aisle. Plain hardwood charcoal broken into small pieces about the size of a marble, 8 inches deep, packed firmly. The charcoal removes chlorine, organic compounds, sulfur smells, and most heavy metals through a process called adsorption. The carbon surface is full of microscopic pores, and contaminants stick to those pores as the water flows past. A 2-pound bag of plain hardwood charcoal runs between $2 and $3 at most hardware or grocery stores. To give you a sense of how much surface area we're talking about, a single gram of hardwood charcoal has roughly 500 square meters of internal surface area. The pores are so small you can't see them with a microscope. Water molecules slide through. Chlorine, sulfur compounds, and dissolved organic matter get caught on the pore walls and stay there. This is the same principle used in every commercial water filter sold today, including the one in your refrigerator door, including the Brita pitcher on your kitchen counter, including the $1,000 reverse osmosis system somebody just sold your neighbor. The mechanism is identical: activated carbon. The difference is the price. Hardwood charcoal is not activated carbon in the technical sense. Activated carbon is processed with steam at high temperatures to open the pore structure further. Plain hardwood charcoal, the kind you can make in your own wood stove or buy for $2, has about 60% of the surface area of commercial activated carbon. 60% for $2 versus 100% for $38 a cartridge. The math on which one is the better deal is not subtle. The third stage is fine sand again, 2 more inches. It catches any small pieces of charcoal dust that might escape the middle layer and gives the water a final polish before it exits the filter. 3 layers: coarse sand, charcoal, fine sand. Same 50-pound bag handles both sand layers, which is why I'm calling the total cost $3. The charcoal is the only thing you're really paying for. The sand is essentially free once you buy the first bag. The whole thing sits in a 5-gallon food-grade bucket with a small spigot drilled into the side near the bottom. Water goes in the top, water comes out the spigot. Gravity does the work. There is no pump. There is no electricity. There's no filter cartridge to replace. The Cherokee people in these mountains used a version of this filter long before any settlers got here. Archaeological evidence from Cherokee village sites in eastern Tennessee shows pottery jars layered with charcoal, sand, and crushed limestone, used specifically for purifying water from streams during the summer months, when stagnation caused biological contamination. Same physics, different materials. The Scots-Irish settlers who came into these mountains starting in the 1730s brought their own version with them. In the Highlands of Scotland and Northern Ireland, families had been filtering peaty bog water through layered sand and charcoal columns for at least 400 years. The settlers brought the design across the Atlantic, adapted it to whatever they could find here, and passed it down for 2 centuries. Every civilization that ever needed clean water came to the same answer eventually. The Egyptians filtered Nile water through layered sand and charcoal columns as far back as 1500 BC. The technique appears in tomb paintings from the New Kingdom. Hieroglyphs describe the process specifically. The ancient Greeks did the same thing. Hippocrates himself described a cloth and charcoal filter for drinking water around 400 BC. He recommended it for preventing the diseases that came from stagnant cisterns. Modern bacteriology confirms he had identified the problem correctly 2,000 years before anyone could see a bacterium. The Romans built sand filtration aqueduct systems that fed water into urban reservoirs all over the empire. Pliny the Elder wrote about charcoal filtration in his Natural History in 77 AD. The Romans knew it removed bad tastes and smells. They didn't know why. They knew it worked. The Chinese, by the Song dynasty in 960 AD, were running drinking water through tiered ceramic vessels filled with charcoal and silver coins. The silver killed bacteria. The charcoal removed everything else. The system fed water to imperial households for 400 years. The Indians of the Mughal Empire combined charcoal with crushed almond shells and dried lotus seeds. The Persians ran water through layered sand and ash columns built into the floor of their kitchens. The Japanese used bamboo and charcoal filters that produced water clean enough to drink during ceremonial tea preparation. Every one of these traditions arrived at the same 3 principles. Coarse material on top to catch debris. A carbon-rich middle layer to capture chemical contaminants. A fine bottom layer to polish the water before it left the filter. The Appalachian filter, Vernon's grandfather built in 1948, wasn't an invention. It was a continuation of something thousands of years older than the United States. Then in 1971, the United States Department of Agriculture stopped telling people about it. In 1934, the USDA published Farmer's Bulletin number 1448, titled Simple Water Filters for the Rural Home. That bulletin ran 36 pages. It documented this exact 3-stage sand and charcoal filter across 200 Appalachian homesteads. It included photographs of the construction. It listed the materials and the costs. It explained the chemistry in plain language a farmer could follow. The whole document was an instruction manual for purifying your own water at home for almost nothing. The bulletin was reprinted 4 times between 1934 and 1968. Tens of thousands of copies went out through county extension offices across the rural South. Then in 1971, the USDA discontinued the bulletin and replaced it with a new publication titled Modern Home Water Treatment for the Farm Family. The new publication promoted commercial whole-house filtration systems and named 3 specific manufacturers: Culligan, Sears, Roebuck. Rainsoft. The simple homemade filter was not mentioned. It had been written out of the federal record. The original 1934 bulletin still exists. I drove to the Lonesome Pine Regional Library in Big Stone Gap, Virginia, to find a physical copy. The reference librarian located one in the closed stacks. It had been requested twice in the last 15 years. Once by a graduate student writing a thesis on rural water systems, once by an older man who didn't say what he wanted it for. The numbers tell you why the USDA changed its tune. The residential water treatment market in the United States is now worth over $15 billion a year. A single whole-house filtration system, installation included, runs between $2,000 and $5,000. Replacement cartridges run between $40 and $120 per cartridge, with most systems requiring 4 to 6 cartridges replaced annually. The lifetime customer value of a single residential water treatment customer, counting initial installation, cartridges, service, and a system replacement every 15 years, is between $12,000 and $18,000. Every Appalachian filter built for $3 is a Culligan system that doesn't get sold, a cartridge that doesn't get replaced, a service contract that nobody signs. Culligan, the company named in the 1971 USDA pamphlet, was founded in 1936 by a man named Emmett Culligan in Northbrook, Illinois. He started by selling water softeners door to door. By 1971, the year the USDA pamphlet went out, Culligan was generating over $100 million a year in revenue across more than 700 dealerships. By 1990, it was the largest residential water treatment company in North America. The 1971 pamphlet was not the cause of that growth, but it was a contributing piece of a much larger pattern. The federal government was no longer telling rural Americans how to handle their water themselves. It was directing them toward a small number of commercial alternatives, Sears Roebuck and Rainsoft. The other two names in the pamphlet both still operate today. All three benefited from a generation of farmers being told to buy their water systems instead of building their own. Now, if you're sitting there thinking this only works if you live in a cabin and have a spring, stay with me, because this next part is specifically for you. I built one of these filters in my basement in Akron in 2018. House was a 1973 ranch on city water, standard suburban construction. I wasn't trying to replace my municipal water entirely. I was trying to remove the chlorine taste, the occasional sediment after a water main flush, and whatever else the city was adding that I didn't trust. I set up a 5-gallon bucket on a wooden shelf in my basement, drilled the spigot, layered the sand and the charcoal, and ran a small tube from my kitchen cold water line into the top of the bucket. The water trickled through the filter under gravity and came out the spigot into a separate glass jug. I used the jug water for drinking, cooking, and coffee. The chlorine smell disappeared completely. The water tasted noticeably different, cleaner, almost sweet. My wife, who I never told what I was doing, asked me 3 days later if I had bought new bottled water because the water in the kitchen tasted better. I told her about the bucket in the basement. She looked at me like I had grown a second head. Then she drank from it the rest of the year. You don't need a basement. You don't need a well. You don't need plumbing modifications. You need a 5-gallon food-grade bucket with a lid. You need a small spigot that costs about $3 at any hardware store. You need a drill, a bag of sand, and a bag of plain hardwood charcoal. The whole setup takes about 30 minutes to build and another 2 hours for the first batch of water to filter through. Now, there's one more thing I have to mention before I tell you about the part of this story that made me angriest. After the last few videos, hundreds of you wrote in asking if I had all of this in one place, the cooling, the heating, and now the water. So I put it together. Every system I've documented from these mountain folks is in one guide, step by step, for any house already built. No new construction required. The link is in the description below this video. But stay here, because what I found in the 1956 Penn State Bulletin is the modification that changes everything about this filter. Let me tell you about Vernon for a minute, because the numbers he runs on are the kind that make every water treatment company in this country uncomfortable. Vernon Caldwell is 79 years old, born in 1945. His wife Margaret passed in 2009. He still lives alone in the cabin he raised 4 children in. The well was drilled in 1968 by Vernon himself, with a friend who owned a truck-mounted rig. It pulls from 110 feet down through limestone, standard for this part of the country. He showed me the filter on his kitchen shelf, the original 5-gallon ceramic jug, glazed white, made by his grandfather in 1948. He was a potter as well as a farmer. He fired it in a homemade kiln he built behind the smokehouse. The barrel half below it catches the filtered water for daily use. The glass jar on the side holds the spare charcoal he replaces every 6 months. He told me a half-pound bag of plain hardwood charcoal lasts his family approximately 6 months at current daily usage, which is around 3 gallons of drinking and cooking water per day for one person. A 2-pound bag costs $2.40 at the Tractor Supply in Coburn. That's the entire annual operating cost of his water system. $2.40 a year, rounded up to $3. His electric bill in July was $42. That covered the well pump, the refrigerator, 3 light bulbs, and a small radio. No water filter to replace. No bottled water from the store. No municipal water bill, because he's not on a municipal line. I asked him how often he rebuilds the filter. He said the sand layers get replaced once every 2 years. The charcoal gets replaced every 6 months. The whole rebuild takes him about 45 minutes. His grandson does it for him now that his knees are bad. The grandson is 26 years old. He's been doing it since he was 14. Vernon told me with some pride that the boy can do it faster than his grandfather ever could. I asked him if he'd ever had his water tested. He nodded and went to a drawer in the hallway. He came back with a state water quality report from 2009. The unfiltered well water tested at 1.4 parts per million for iron, which is above the EPA's secondary standard of 0.3. It tested at 0.18 parts per million for manganese, slightly above the 0.05 secondary standard. Coliform bacteria, low but detectable. Total dissolved solids, elevated. The filtered water, tested at the same lab in the same week, came back below detection limits for every category. Cleaner than the bottled water his granddaughter brings him from the grocery store. Cleaner than the city water at the diner in town. He handed me the report and said, "My grandfather built this filter when I was 3 years old. It's been working ever since." I sat in his kitchen for most of the afternoon. I drank 3 glasses of water from the filter. It tasted clean. There was no metallic edge, no chemical smell, just water. He made me a sandwich with bread he had baked himself that morning, washed down with more water from the same jug. I watched him run dishes through the same filtered water at the sink. The water in his house had not come from a municipal line in 76 years. The well pump in the basement was the only piece of electric machinery between him and the limestone aquifer, 110 feet below the cabin. He walked me through his morning routine. He gets up at 5:45 every day, the same time he got up for 51 years, working the mines. He fills a kettle from the spigot under the ceramic jug and puts it on the wood stove in the corner of the kitchen. He uses the same filtered water for coffee, for the oatmeal he eats every morning, for the cast iron pan he scrambles 2 eggs in, for the dishes he washes after. By 8 in the morning, he has used about 1.5 gallons of filtered water. By the end of the day, about 3 gallons. He has not turned a faucet on a municipal line since 1968. He also told me something that I had not thought to ask about. The filter takes about 1.5 hours to process a full 5 gallons. He keeps 2 backup jugs filled and ready on a shelf below the main filter. When the daily jug runs low, he switches to a backup. The empty one goes back into the filter to refill overnight. He has never run out of water in 76 years, not once. And then he told me about the modification his grandfather added in 1952 that I never would have figured out on my own. That 1956 Penn State bulletin I mentioned, the one I found in a footnote in a USDA reference index. The bulletin was titled Heavy Metal Sequestration in Rural Drinking Water Sources. It documented a modification to the basic 3-stage filter that added a 4th element above the charcoal layer. The modification was a small handful of dry hardwood ash, 2 inches deep, sandwiched between the top sand layer and the charcoal layer. Hardwood ash is rich in calcium carbonate. When water with dissolved heavy metals like iron, manganese, lead, and trace cadmium passes through hardwood ash, the calcium carbonate causes a chemical reaction called precipitation. The metals bond to the calcium and drop out of solution as solid particles. Those particles then get trapped in the sand and charcoal layers below. The Penn State researchers tested the modification across 47 Appalachian wells with elevated heavy metal content. The modified four-layer filter removed an average of 94% of dissolved iron, 89% of manganese, 96% of lead, and 78% of trace cadmium. Without the ash layer, the basic three-stage filter removed only about 40% of those same contaminants. Hardwood ash is free. If you burn wood, you already have it. Vernon's grandfather had been using it for 4 years before the Penn State researchers wrote it up. Vernon's father, after reading the bulletin in 1956, added it to the family filter and never went back. 4 layers: coarse sand, hardwood ash, charcoal, fine sand, same 5-gallon bucket, same gravity flow, 94% reduction in heavy metals. Total annual operating cost, $3 in charcoal. The ash is free if you burn wood. The sand replenishes itself out of one bag for about 2 years. I'm going to tell you something straight. For 35 years, I paid for water. Every month, I drank from bottles. I serviced a filter. I trusted that whatever the city was sending through the pipe was clean because somebody had told me it was clean. I never once asked what was in it. My granddaddy Wendell ran that spring on his back 40 for 75 years without paying anyone $1 for the water he drank. Not because he was poor, not because he was stubborn, because he knew what was in his ground. He knew what his filter could do. He knew what every family in these mountains had figured out 200 years before me. The knowledge was never lost. It was set aside, pulled out of a USDA bulletin in 1971, buried in a Penn State footnote where nobody would find it, replaced by commercial water treatment systems that cost 1,000 times more and do roughly the same job. The sand is still at the hardware store. The charcoal is still in the grocery store. The hardwood ash is still in your stove if you burn wood. The spring on the back of Vernon's property still runs clean, the way it has for 200 years. The only thing that changed is whether anybody told you about it. Now you know. Drop your state in the comments. Tell me whether you're on a private well or a municipal line. Tell me what you spend on water filters, cartridges, and bottled water in a year. And if your grandfather or your father or anyone in your family ever filtered water through a homemade system, I want to hear that story. There are 500 of them in these mountains alone. You leaving a comment is how we keep them from disappearing. Hit subscribe if you want to keep digging these things up with me before they're gone for good. The folks who taught me this are in their 70s and 80s. We don't have a lot of time. Next week, I'm driving 4 hours into the coal fields outside Beckley, West Virginia, to meet a 67-year-old retired mine electrician named Riley Boggs, who has not paid a heating bill in 22 years, not $1. He heats a 1,600-square-foot farmhouse through a West Virginia winter on a stove he built for $40 in materials. The EPA made his design effectively illegal to manufacture in 1988. He's still using it. I'll see you there.